Show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
A very good evening. You're welcome to Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Kizito. On Spectrum tonight we review the week. Some of the issues we'll be looking at: the rumored meeting between President Museveni and Dr. Besigye. We'll look about the fight against graft in Parliament, bi-partisan forum, if you can call it that. Different parties coming together to say they fight corruption together. And the differences within the Public Accounts Committee. The chairman, who belongs to the opposition, Cassian Owadri, says that the people moving the censure motion, they've gathered enough signatures to move that forward, should wait for his committee to conclude work. We'll also talk about the economy. Interest rates of the banks going up, inflation going down, but the rate's not coming down at the same pace. And our guests tonight to tackle these topics: Honorable Mike Sebalu, Ugandan representative at the East African Legislative Assembly, also a member of the NRM NEC. You're most welcome, Honorable Sebalu.
Thank you very much, Edmond, and I'd like to salute our listeners out there and our viewers, and to wish them an eventful and progressive 2012. So it's good that I've been able to make it to this program. Basically, the first one of its kind in 2012.
The first weekly review. Thank you very much, Honorable Sebalu. Of course, it says viewers, because we're also on the internet. You can access our Spectrum video of YouTube. Type the word, you can go to the website or you can go to YouTube. Our second guest is Mr. Nicolas Opiyo, legal consultant at AKIJUL, also a commentator on social and political issues. You're most welcome, Mr. Opiyo.
Well, thank you very much, Edmond, and Happy New Year to you, to all my colleagues on the show, and to all the listeners.
We also have Mr. Vincent Mayanja, Deputy Secretary General of the Democratic Party. You're most welcome, Mr. Mayanja.
Thank you, Edmond. Happy New Year to everybody. Happy New Year to our listeners. Happy New Year to our viewers.
Honorable Mike Sebalu, there's been speculation about possible talks between President Museveni and his political enemy, Dr. Besigye. Dr. Besigye has denied such plans, and yesterday when he sat here, he said, well, they can meet to talk about cows. If it's national issues, it must be a broader dialogue. What do you think is the reality of this?
First, I just want to correct the impression you've created.
They're not enemies. They're political friends. Maybe they're political friends.
They're competitors in the political space.
Sure.
And definitely one has been a victim of the strength of the other, but they coexist. They're Ugandans. They've expressed their interest to lead this country. They've competed to take the top slot of this country 3 times, and all the 3 times Yoweri Kaguta Museveni has convincingly defeated Kano Besigye. But that is not to say that Kano Besigye is not a useful Ugandan. Indeed he is, and his participation, his ideas have formed the basis for competition, and he has made a contribution as an opposition, and that can be appreciated. But the talks that have been very highly publicized in recent times in the media are speculative in my view, because I'm yet to get an authoritative comment from the different authoritative sources giving good justification for that. If it did take place at one point or the other, it wouldn't be a bad idea. I don't think it is a bad idea to get leaders in different aspects of life meeting. And the president is on record. He's been meeting very many leaders. He meets religious leaders, he meets business leaders, he meets cultural leaders. So it shouldn't be a very exciting thing for the president to meet opposition leaders, because he's on record, both in practice, he's been meeting different leaders at different levels. So it wouldn't be a bad idea in my view. But for Kano Besigye to say he can't meet President Museveni,
I said they can talk about cows.
But I think really, if there is anyone to benefit from these talks, I think, in my view, I think Kano Besigye would really benefit if he's given an audience at that level, that would be something to write home about. So for him to try to downplay it, I think is not being fair to himself, and I don't think he's being very honest. To me, if that opportunity ever availed itself, it would benefit him more. It would up his profile in politics. He has not met the leader of this country for a long time. And I don't think it would be a good idea. It would be a bad idea if we were offered an opportunity to do so. So to me, if it ever happened, it would be good for the two.
For his own public relations.
For the two leaders, for his public relations, but also for the country. But I don't think that the president of the republic is desperate to meet him.
All right.
That impression should not be created that the president is desperate to meet him. But if an opportunity avails itself,
it benefits
for a good cause and for mutual benefit,
photographs on the lawn.
It should be something that could be encouraged.
Well, obviously, I've been very, very dismissive of this kind of thing. Some people would think it's an extremely serious matter. Mr. Mayanja, why would they need to meet? Mr. Museveni won the election just last year.
Well, I think the fact that even the president and the people in the NRM are talking about these talks, it gives you the impression how important they are. But of course, first and foremost, we can't say that President Museveni and Besigye are meeting, and that's very good for the country. The politics of this country cannot be reduced into that Museveni-Besigye confrontation. We think that these talks should be national. They should involve all stakeholders in this country. The issues at stake that I think even my friend Honorable Sebalu is trying to dismiss are well known. They all need our attention. They need all of us to come on board and talk about them. But we, as the Democratic Party, we think that it should be structured talks. It should be with somebody who is going to mediate them. And of course, we need to have mechanisms of how we can follow up on whatever agreements or on whatever resolutions are reached in those talks. But really, to say that President Museveni does not really, need to meet Mr. Besigye, is not very desperate to meet him. Well, we can continue burying our heads in the sand, but I think the issues at hand are for everybody to see. The country is at crossroads. The economy is at a standstill. Everything is not moving the way we want it to move. Therefore, we need everybody on board to see that we move it.
Maybe what I want
to see that we move it.
Clarify.
We move from this. We move from where we are to another level.
Yeah.
And if we can't,
what I want to clarify and my friend to bring out is like when Dr. Besigye says you can only meet him to talk about cows.
Yes.
He's the one trying
for the milk they
to show that. So I think when he reduces it to that, that's why I bring in the element that definitely the president can never be.
I think I'm not a spokesman. I'm not a spokesman of Dr. Besigye, but I think what he meant is that the just talks between the two gentlemen is not good enough, and that everybody should be brought on board. I listened to him and he said, no, if we are going to meet, then everybody, it must be a political dialogue of all stakeholders in this country, of religious leaders, of political leaders, of cultural leaders, so that everybody really brings out what they think can be done to get the country where it is.
All right,
Mr. Mayanja, are you aware that the president called such a meeting where all other political leaders attended and it only Dr. Besigye wouldn't appear?
The only problem, let's get it very clearly. This gentleman won an election last year. Even sang a song in the process. Why would he need to meet opposition leaders? He's got a victory, 68%.
Well, in Egypt, before the ouster of Mubarak,
yes,
Mubarak had just won an election with over 90%.
Only 93.
And you know what? Just a few months later, he saw the power of the people, and I think they need it now.
Well, Edmond, the suggestion that the problem of Uganda is Kizito, Besigye and Museveni, and that if somewhat they met and talked, all of this would be resolved, I think in my view is nonsensical. I think that the fact that the two key players for the last 10 years have been the two gentlemen not necessarily mean that that is going to be the solution for this country. The problems of this country are much bigger than President Museveni and Dr. Kizito. However, a meeting of the two and a hammering of a middle position of these two acrimonious friends might in many ways go a long way in fostering national reconciliation, because the need for national reconciliation has been long overdue. There have been processes that have been geared towards bridging the north and south divide, the Uganda central government divide. So the need for national reconciliation across many issues beyond the bickering of Mr. Museveni and Mr. Kizito really is more important, is less important than the national process that we think we need to undertake. I can tell you, all these parties are grappling with tribal issues. The FDC had an outburst the other time, Regan Okumwa and Sam Jinhanda, saying that they cannot expect another Westerner to succeed Besigye. The DP is still grappling with the fact that a guy from northern Uganda is not a DP President General. The NRM have for a long time been muting the idea that the next successor to the NRM party should be somebody from the east. This speaks to, in my view, speaks to a larger problem of ethnic division, of regional imbalance. And these are some of the key issues we need to address as a country. Secondly, Edmond, I think we can borrow a leaf from what happened in Gulu district. I'll give an example. And again, this is in reference to the Honorable Norbert Mao. The Honorable Norbert Mao had a very acrimonious relationship with the late Colonel Walter Ochora. They used to abuse their mothers on radio, use all sorts of insults. What the elders in Gulu did was to summon these two people before the clan leaders, before the chiefs, and their differences were ironed out. They were called to order and told to respect their Chole people, respect their dignity, and respect their officers. I do think that President Museveni and Dr. Kizito deserve a similar process, that they have held this country to some disastrous effect for over a long time, and that the elders of this country, the stakeholders of this country, must call them to order.
But no, when
to ask them to behave, to ask them to...
When you invite those, what is the issue on table?
Go on.
Are you asking President Museveni, why have you defeated this guy so many times? Or isn't he not accepting defeat? What are you putting on the table?
The entire question we must address is not a winning of election. You and I know that President Museveni's election has been...
The election did not settle the political
question of its legitimacy hasn't been settled.
Right.
So that in itself cannot be, I think, a ground for rubbishing, a call for a meeting between the two. I think that the issues of electoral legitimacy, the issues of personal differences,
from
that I
perspective.
Well,
because we talk about electoral legitimacy, from whose perspective?
You've read electoral
because you have a majority voting for someone, and then someone claims, and you make that legitimacy.
Electoral reports across this country, from the EU to the East African community, from the African Union, have questioned the legitimacy of the election, including the Supreme Court judgments in many cases.
Two previous court rulings
have questioned the legitimacy of the election. But also besides, look at the numbers that voted. President Museveni is a leader with only 5 million votes. 5 million votes.
Yes.
What happened to the rest who stayed away? Could that be a protest? Could that be a rejection? Could that be a ground to question his legitimacy?
Right.
So he is a leader, but he has only 5 million. There are more than 5 million voters in this country.
We need to move forward.
But if you talk about legitimacy,
let's go to the other side.
It is clear in our constitution.
Let's move forward.
Once that is achieved, you can't raise the issue of legitimacy.
Let's just
it was even 100%.
It's not simple majority. It is actually absolute majority. It's 50+1 in the constitution.
And once you meet that,
it is 50 of those who stand up to vote, but not the entire voting population.
Let's get the question.
And when it's about 100%,
it's very good. We don't know what to do.
This is my point. I think that the National Council of Elders which was until recently led by
Justice
Ogola, should call these two gentlemen to order and tell them to act up, because in many ways their own personal differences is causing problems to this country.
Right, and they won 90% of the vote between the two of them. Two candidates from the north came next with less than 5%, and then 4 candidates from Uganda took the remainder, coming at the bottom of the table. The 2 western candidates had most votes. 2 northern candidates at the second level, and the 4 from Uganda had the weakest performance. Let's go to Parliament right now. The fight against AIDS. MPs have formed a bi-partisan forum, that is, we can call it bi-partisan. All the parties have come together saying they will fight corruption, and they want the resignation of ministers, asking for signatures. The number has been gathered, and they say they will not rest until justice has been done, corruption has been rooted. Mr. Vincent Mayanja, they are going to Chankwanzi for 2 weeks. Do you think we shall still have the same arguments when they get back, or shall we see more fire?
Well, I've said here before that I really prefer the legislature to remain the legislature and the NRM to remain the political party we know. I hope that when they go to Chankwanzi, they are going to talk about the affairs of NRM, and I'm not concerned about that.
You should be concerned, the government of this country.
But if they are going to Chankwanzi to influence the way Parliament performs its duties, then that would be a bad day for the country. But of course, I want about MPs forming a bipartisan forum to fight graft. I don't think that really that is I don't think they are wasting a lot of time.
What do you mean by that?
What they need to do is to do their work and do it well.
Well, that's what they're doing.
I think they can go on the floor of Parliament, prepare motions together, and then they move on.
That's what they're doing, but they're giving it a name, basically.
Well, we have seen so many of those, and they have digressed into other things. I hope they are not going to do that.
Talk about PAFO?
There was PAFO, there was
what are you talking about here?
Well,
I degenerated to something.
That's what I think. I don't want really to see again another political party being formed in Parliament.
But because they might come with a political party.
That's what I think, because we
bad
have seen. Well, it's not a bad thing for DP. It's a good thing for democracy. But I think it is going to divert them from the work they are supposed to do in Parliament. They should just go there, look at the issues, and analyze those issues independently without any influence, without undue influence from anyone else from outside, from being influenced by what they want to be next. If they want to be a party, then they will do things that suit that. But I think that what they should do is to do things that are good for the country.
You think they might begin to build those things like symbols and flags?
They will go up to that extent if they start forming forums in Parliament. I don't think that's proper.
Nicholas?
Well, Edmond, I think the fight against corruption is actually a noble cause. For a very long time, this country has been held to ransom by people who are outrightly corrupt, who are fleeching this country of taxpayers' money. But I think what we need to examine or interrogate further is why these new initiatives to fight corruption. I mean, you and I know that for a very long time, corruption has been in this government. People have been accused of stealing money, and nothing has been done. You know, Sabinsa took a bribe, and the president said he forgave him because he used the money for development projects in northern Uganda. So I think the question we need to interrogate is why now? I do think that this movement to fight corruption has its genesis in not just the interest to fight corruption. It's, for me, a transfer of the huge disagreement, the fracture within the movement party between the conservative movementists and the liberals, what you call the rebel MPs, who are fighting. I mean, the liberal guys are fighting for space. They're trying to inject more energy into the party. They're trying to infuse more ideas into the party, and therefore are facing resistance. And what do? They then go out to begin to name and shame people who are, in their view, holding the party backward. So for me, I think that one, it is a transfer of the infighting, of the eruption within the movement party. And then that's why you see many of the people who are involved in the fight against corruption within the movement belong to a particular section of the people in the movement. They're not your hardline core conservative movement people who would do anything to somersault and praise and praise NRM. So you have young, energetic, and new people coming in to fight corruption. Secondly, I also think that the rather unexpected marriage between the opposition members of parliament and NRM members of parliament is essentially because the space that the opposition used to occupy is no more. That voice has now been replaced by actually progressive liberal movement voices. So in an attempt to try and reoccupy that space, you then see efforts by people like Abdul Katuntu and other opposition leading candidates or MPs to try and come and govern us and say, look, we're also fighting corruption. Because essentially they were being drawn out. Their voices were not being heard. So I think that these initiatives are short-term initiatives aimed to achieve other goals as opposed to fighting corruption. I think the fight against corruption has got to be located far outside the frameworks that the MPs are proposing. I mean, as the Deputy Secretary General said, that Parliament needs to just do its work, and if they do it right, corruption will be fought. Thirdly, I do think that what is happening also in Parliament is, this renewed energy, in my view, may not be sustainable, because it's early days in the lifespan of this Parliament. When we get to mid-term, when we get to the year when we are approaching re-election, members of Parliament will begin to think about their re-election. And when you begin to think about your re-election,
think about the party.
You then begin to think about your own survival as an MP. Mm-hmm. And some of these efforts will no doubt fall by the wayside. Some of these voices will no doubt run dry as we approach the second half of the tenure of this House. What I wait to see, I'd be pleasantly surprised if they kept their voices throughout their tenure in office. So meetings such as the ones in Chankwanzi might be used to lay strategies to try and beat them back into order. And I think once they dangle the carrot that if you don't stop this, you might actually lose your seat. Take an example. All the members of PAC in the 8th Parliament lost their seats except the chairperson. Think about it, and I think these MPs haven't looked at that fact. If they do, they might see them acting differently.
You call them progressive liberals and not radicals. Why is that?
Well, for a long time, there are those who are going to some assault and beat themselves about and say the movement is good, is good, is good. They won't accept faults. They will always blame. You see, the thing is that President Museveni has for a long time, each time there's a crisis, each time there's a problem, they have been pointing at people. Even in the latest corruption scandal, the President Museveni is very clear, and the rest are the ones who have done something wrong. In actual sense, the Americans will say the buck stops at his desk.
Right.
He must take responsibility. Now, there are those who will not take those responsibilities, and those are the people I call conservatives. But those who are now coming in, who are calling for responsibility on either side of the divide, are what in my view are called movement liberals or movement progressives.
This is Spectrum Radio 1. We're reviewing the week. When we come back, we'll hear from Honorable Mike Sebalu what he thinks about these people. Does he get concerned that they might form another party and break away from the NRM? Do stay tuned.
John, Mike and I, we go back a bit. We knew John at the beginning, working for someone else. But he was different. He had vision, saw opportunities. He started working towards his goal, opened his own garage, and worked, learning the hard way. His reputation spread. Trust, consistency, quality. Soon people were coming to him from all parts. He made himself and his whole street prosper, and also helped friends, seeing potential in people and helping them on. But John never shouts about all his success. He's just who he is. Special.
So here's to men like John, who make a difference, who enjoy Nile Special, the rich, satisfying taste from the source. Nile Special. You've earned it.
Not for sale to persons under 18.
For all your insurance covers, Statewide Insurance Company Limited is the answer. We cover your motor third-party, workers' compensation, health, travelers' personal and marine accidents, funeral expenses, fire and special perils insurance policies, and many others. You are at risk only if you're not insured by SWICO. We are located at Shua House, Plot 1, Bombo Road, Kampala, with branches in Entebbe, Jinja, Mbarara, Mbale, Masaka, Gulu, and Iganga.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Welcome back to Spectrum on Radio 1. Tonight we're reviewing the week of our guests. Honorable Mike Sebalu, Ugandan representative at the East African Legislative Assembly, also a member of the NEC of the NRM. Mr. Nicolas Opiyo, legal consultant at AKIJUL, and commentator on social and political issues, and Mr. Vincent Mayanja, Deputy Secretary General of the Democratic Party. You can text us tonight so you can contribute to this discussion. What it is that the word Spectrum. Message, question or comment and send it to 7197, or join us on Spectrum Debate. That's on Facebook. Facebook Spectrum Debate. Send your message. It will be read on air before we're out. Honorable Mike Sebalu, this so-called bipartisan forum in Parliament, fight graft. Is that something that you agree with? Is it healthy or is it not?
Thank you very much. I think we need to appreciate two things in this respect. We do have issues of corruption that are being attended to by members of parliament, and definitely issues of corruption need to be, they are bipartisan really in nature, because it affects everyone in society, and but the procedure and the manner in which this is pursued is what maybe we may look at, and it is not it is not uncommon in Parliament for informal forums to be put in place to pursue a given agenda. You have all, actually even in this Parliament, there are many parliamentary forums put in place to, like on food security, there is something on population, there is something, and you find it is interest-based. So you find they put an issue on the table and say, those that are interested in this subject, let's have a forum where we can sit, compare notes, share experiences, and do advocacy work for that. And there are many of them, there are about 20. They are not formal structures of Parliament, but they are informal arrangements which people use to coalesce ideas around a common interest. So you will find that even these people are operating from that perspective as to whether it can end up into a party or some other organizational structure.
There is a precedent.
I don't want to speculate.
There is a precedent.
I don't want to speculate over that. But then that being connected to the Chamkwanzi, having this forum in place, having fight corruption in place, definitely is not in any way exclusive, or is not in any way counter to the running of the party. One thing we need to appreciate is that we have an NRM party which has got majority in Parliament, an NRM party which is also governing this country. So when the chairman of the party invites members of Parliament who belongs to his party for a retreat, for a recollection, for comparing notes, and because there have been challenges, we will agree. Definitely you and me will appreciate that we have had serious economic challenges globally. These have been global, these have been regional, these have been national. And in our case, we've had serious economic issues. We've had drought, we have exchange rates now, it's a big issue. We've had exchange rates, you know, the value of the shilling. These have been serious issues. So when a leading party goes to say, look, we are in recess, let's take off time, go and look at the issues that are affecting, because we have a mandate that came from the people, and we must take stock of how far we've gone in terms of implementing our proposals that we sold to the people in our manifesto. So when we go to Chamkwanzi and you are dealing with economic issues and any other issues because you are in government, then that should not be seen as trying to preempt or to divert the corruption fire that has been lit. One thing we need to appreciate, NRM has put in place structures to deal with issues of corruption.
But we
if these structures have worked or not, that is another matter.
Is anyone really interested, or is this gesticulating, gesturing?
NRM is, you can never
have from you. NRM is interested in fighting corruption.
Definitely it is.
Oh, really?
It is interested. But there may be challenges of doing so.
You don't think that still
but I think it is interested, and we need to appreciate that dealing with the bigger picture of refocusing the economic position and the different arrangements in place to ensure that we move as our promises to the population is something that we really need to give due consideration.
Nicolas, before we move forward.
Yeah, Edmond, I mean, the last time we were on this show, a caller called and made a very interesting point that without corruption, the movement government will not be sustainable.
Do you believe such things?
Well, I do think that in many cases, corruption has been used as a tool of political patronage.
Oh, really?
Yes, on many instances. It does seem that people who are corrupt, kind of find. I mean, I read the report from the meeting, about Kabakulu Masiko in Entebbe, in which the president said, why did you do this? And she said, no, you see, I was trying to
campaign,
to campaign, to try and there were so many elements of negative voices, and I was trying to do this to improve the image of the party. And then that the president retorted and said, oh, my little God, you should have told me if your mission was noble. It does mean that, but if it had the seal of approval,
but even if Nicolas, the practical part of it is that the last time they were in Kiankwanzi, they were moving against somebody. I think that's the oil debate.
Yes. Yeah.
But after they went to Kiankwanzi and came back, these people changed their voices.
Yes.
And we have, even before this fight intensified in Parliament, those who were really pointing out these issues in Parliament and were members of the NRM were characterized as rebel MPs.
Yes.
And the president one time said, we are going to discipline them.
Yes.
So I do not know whether when they go to Kiankwanzi, this is not what is going to take place. And I with that type of attitude, I don't know whether the NRM is really serious about fighting corruption.
Because what do you think is going to happen in Kiankwanzi when they come back?
In Kiankwanzi. The proposed rules for the NRM party caucus is going to be discussed. It might be approved, and that will institute a stringent regime that will restrict the freedom of members of parliament.
And this time they have 2 weeks. The other time they had only 1 week. This
so
time
I think that top of the agenda is going to be the discussion of the rules.
So you think the fight against corruption
is a very unfortunate rule that will in many ways, I think, stifle debate and transfer debate on the floor of the House to a party caucus where members of parliament come back.
And this thing is going to be killed.
I think Nicolas could do himself a lot of good not to speculate about the meeting. Is not this is serious speculation, because Kiankwanzi is going to deal with serious topical issues of the economy. So for someone to speculate that it is this to stifle, can we be patient enough and wait for the outcome of Kiankwanzi? And Kiankwanzi will come out and we'll get to know what transpired.
Let's hear it.
What is stifling is not the Kiankwanzi meeting, but the proposed rules I'm talking about. Okay. But my second suggestion, that I think will occupy members in Kiankwanzi, is going to be the question of constituting this cabinet. The cabinet is not fully constituted.
You think there's going to be an attempt?
Maybe an attempt to ask for people to, discuss.
Dangle positions around.
I think. Let me guide the meeting. Let me guide the discussion.
We know you come from General and I love it so much.
No, but I just from a principled point of view. Really, matters of appointment have never been matters of retreats.
Yes.
The president, when he's appointing, he's got that mandate to appoint, and he's got channels and structures to vet, to even seek, ideas on who is suitable. So it is not something that is done in a public debate like in
but I think the point is
there has never been any cabinet reshuffle that has been a subject of public discussion. It has not been. And I can definitely say with a great deal of authority that such a subject cannot appear in discussions in Kiankwanzi. No, you can quote me on that one.
No, so saying that during the discussions in Kiankwanzi, in the corridors, there will be hushed voices saying, if you behave well, you could be, part of the cabinet next time. Is that what you're saying?
That has always been there. The possibility that somebody from the party will be a minister has always been there.
Well, but this time we have always vacancies.
People have always played to that. But what I think is going to be crucial, it's not about really the appointments as such, but the question of the rejection of the majority of of some of the appointments. This is unprecedented. Never before have we had as much nominees actually rejected by Parliament. So there's going to be a request for them to really look, guys, if our guys come up, please support them. Please.
Do you expect a cabinet reshuffle soon? 5 people were rejected, 5 nominees. 1 minister resigned, 2 ministers could be fired or could be censured. Do you think we create?
Well, it is obvious that the government is shaky. The cabinet is shaky, so you need really to strengthen it. If I was President Museveni, I would definitely go for a cabinet
or maybe reshuffle.
Yes.
All right. Let's move to something else. Inside of Parliament again, the Public Accounts Committee, which is headed by Honorable Kassiano Wadri, the chairman of that group, says the MPs who are trying to censure ministers should not do it. They should wait for his committee to present its findings. Is that a sensible thing for him to do?
Well, somehow I want to agree but disagree with Honorable Wadri. I agree with him because there is no basis on which these members of Parliament correcting signatures are basing their actions on. Well, if they are really talking about graft and things like that, then it should be really documented in a report. And I think there, Honorable Wadri is right.
For a censure motion?
But for a censure, because a censure motion must be supported by evidence.
By documents.
By documents and things like that. I don't know whether they have them. But the more important
thing, say this man was paid money, and they're saying somebody has to suffer.
But all these are really somebody is saying this, and the other one is saying this. So there is a committee analyzing all that.
It is not true.
What I fear about this, what I agree with the Honorable Wadri, is that we might leave out the real culprits.
What do you mean?
Well, we are only pinpointing 2 ministers.
Yes.
But the 2 ministers and some senior government officials are appointed to another person.
Which person are you talking about?
Well, this is the president. I don't feel saying this. Mr. Makubuya, Bomba, the Governor Bank of Uganda, all those guys have said that, you know what, we were elected by the president. So if the members of Parliament just rush with their decisions, they might leave the real people outside their action. I would really prefer that they take it up. But why I disagree again with the Honorable Wadri is that we are dealing with politics.
Yes.
And in politics in Uganda, these people can be panel beated somehow, and by the time you produce your report, so many reports have been produced in Parliament, they come to Parliament and you wait for months.
Let me just chip on what I think is the legal position.
Right.
I think this particular situation presents a legal lacuna. It's a grey area. Because the provision of Article 118, which provides for a censure of the minister, provides that Parliament may, by a resolution of more than a half of all members of Parliament, pass a vote of censure against the minister. It does not, and if you look at Rule 90 of the Rules of Procedure of Parliament, and Rule 93, it does not say that a censure motion can be put to a halt if there is a proceeding in respect of the same subjects before a committee of Parliament.
Yes.
So I think this particular case presents a legal lacuna.
Well, it's not saying it's a legal foundation, it's talking about procedure, basically.
In as far as the rules are concerned, there seems to be nothing apparently preventing members of Parliament
from doing what
to concurrently collect signatures for a censure of a minister who is a subject of an investigation before a committee of Parliament, provided, and I must add this, they have credible and grounds and information to ask for a vote of censure. Because any vote of censure, any motion of censure should not be stopped. But let us examine the grounds upon which this motion is based. If they have evidence, there is nothing in the law, both the rules of procedure and the constitution, that blocks members of Parliament.
Do you think they have the evidence?
I don't know.
I think they are clear. We've got the rules of procedure, but in Parliament also we've got what we call practice. Parliamentary practice and the decorum. These also give basis on how certain things are done. Actually, in most parliaments, you may find that certain practices are not even written, but they've been used and tested over time, and it becomes a practice. Now, ordinarily, and in a very organized, because you are looking at something you could have the same achievement, but you could do it neater, following a certain sequence and a certain procedure to arrive at a logical conclusion.
But this has never happened before, isn't it? Where a minister before a committee is actually subject to censure motion.
But you see, the practice of Parliament is that, be it a resolution, Parliament works on basis of reports. That's why we have committees in place. That's why every subject matter or sector has got a committee. And when an issue comes from any source, it is laid on the table and it is forwarded to the relevant committee to do thorough, deep investigation of a matter at hand. Now, this matter is before the Committee of Public Accounts, yes. And the evidence which is available has already been generated by that same committee.
Well, you never know what these guys have.
No, because this committee is the one which has interacted with the different stakeholders. I mean, using procedure. I'm not saying using other means. I'm now looking at the use of procedure, because the serious evidence that appeared to have come and ignited a lot of interest was the interaction between the committee and the president, where the president said, and he adduced evidence in terms of his own letters and communications, and where he challenged some of his handlers, ADs, to provide the committee with the reason why they acted the way they did. So sufficient kind of evidence was generated from that interaction.
Some of the petitioners are actually members of the committee.
And some of the petitioners are members of the committee, which even makes it a little disturbing, because when you are part of the committee and then you go, you may appear as if you are preempting the work of your own committee. But what we need to see is that what I see now, I think these people are becoming impatient, maybe.
All right, Mr. Mayanja,
they really want to get to the close of the matter.
Let's talk about
in the absence of a specific legal provision of or a rule providing for this, we have resorted to parliamentary procedures, which in our case has never happened before. So we've got to look outside this country.
And you see what is happening now, that Parliament is going to debate new rules of procedure, because they're in the process of amending them. Maybe possibly this is an area that they may need to look at, so that they interest themselves. But what I want to say, that at the end of the day, they are all aiming at one, but one is appearing to be going into someone's domain. That's why the chairman of the committee cannot sit back when he's got a report to present, whose effect is to provide such evidence and therefore create a basis for further action. So I think he has a point as a chairman. Of course, the Senate mandate does not. These people they are not prohibited by any law.
Let's move
because provision 118 allows the process to deal with subjects.
Let's talk about the economy, Mr. Mayanja. City traders this week say they will close their shops and take all their money from the central banks if interest rates don't come down. Their main concern or complaint is that the banks they borrowed money from raised the rates as soon as the CBR went up, the commercial, the central bank benchmark rate. What do you think could happen, and what can be done to avert this?
Well, first and foremost, the central bank is right to put up these stringent measures in order to tame inflation. But of course, before we look at all that, we need to look at other things. I think the central bank should have looked at other things that could really help the situation, and one of them would be really reducing the cost, the operation cost of banks.
How would they do that? They don't run the bank.
Well, of course they don't run the bank, but they are the regulatory body of the bank.
How do they do it?
They just set standards.
They can set standards. If you look at the salaries of those executives in those banks, it is just astronomical. And this
like the cases here, they compete.
Really, this is very, very unfortunate. I think those are the issues we need to first look at. The other thing we have raised as
but this is private business. There is a level below which you cannot go to.
Well, that's true, but you are the regulator. Because these people are not managing their own money. They are managing people's money.
But they're also running a business.
Yes. But you don't. If you are a regulator, you don't allow the people who are running businesses to really take their clientele.
All right, go on.
What they want. I think they need to come in and really regulate the banking industry. The other issue is that most of these banks are foreign.
Yes.
They are making a lot of profits, and they are not reinvesting that money in Uganda.
What do they want? What do you want them to do?
Well, I want them to float shares on the stock exchange, so that Ugandans can buy these shares, so that Uganda can share on those profits they make. The other thing we have raised this week, and this is the Democratic Party, is that we need to look at the way this came about.
Yes.
Why did the inflation go up?
Yes.
It was because we mismanaged the treasury.
Yes.
We just raided the treasury, got out money, put it in politics.
The other issues, Eurozone crisis.
And we
Middle East crisis.
All those have been around, but the inflation in Kenya is not as high as ours.
Well, a combination of factors, imported inflation.
Then secondly, we saw the government, the president, going to the central bank and securing $740 million to buy jets.
Right.
All that money had an effect on the
for our security.
And secondly, lastly, what I want to say is that, well, I agree, the public has to carry their cross as they headed to clean up the mess in the economy, but let those who are responsible take their responsibility. The governor Bank of Uganda should take responsibility.
How should they do it?
Let him resign. President Museveni should take responsibility.
What should he do?
Resign.
He should also resign.
Okay. Maybe we'll talk to the president the weekend.
I like those simple stuff. You don't govern a country like that.
Well, you don't govern a country by mismanaging it.
The issue of inflation and all these interest rates is global. It is a global matter. And I don't want us to look at it.
Are they as high as in Uganda?
Southern Sudan is 65%.
It is global. Go to all the Western economies. It is a big problem. It is global. We've really had a bad year in terms of global economy. And this has had effects, and Uganda is no exception in this regard.
So that
this is a temporary issue that does not need the emotional reaction. It needs more of technical. So I call upon the Bank of Uganda and the Ministry of Finance, to really shape up and deal with both the monetary and fiscal issues in a manner that can address the situation and get it from getting worse. After what we want to look at is to ensure that it doesn't get worse. Manage it at that level
and
improve the situation.
Of what the effect of this prime rates is.
Yes.
Bank lending rates have now gone as high as 35%.
Yes.
What does that mean? It means that a middle income earner who took a mortgage and has been paying, say, about 1 million shillings a month to acquire a house might actually most likely lose his house.
Yes.
Because the banks have charged these interest rates retrospectively, even on loans that have been borrowed 10 years ago that are still running. So a guy who has taken out a mortgage to buy a house might lose his house.
Maybe not retrospectively. They've adjusted the rates progressively.
Well, even if there were rates that were, you borrowed loans 5 years ago, and you're paying at 22%.
Yes.
You are now paying 35%.
True.
Because the rates have also gone up.
Adjusted from that time upwards.
That's how worse it is.
Yes.
Secondly, a businessman who has borrowed money for his business on a particular projection is most likely going to be foreclosed by a bank for failure to pay his rate.
Just like the subprime crisis in the US.
It's much bigger than what you think. There are people now who are losing their houses, who are losing their businesses, who are having to actually make do with hard economic times because of these prime rates.
Right.
So don't take lightly the threats by all the traders in Kampala to do what they say they want to do, because they're actually the guys who are feeling the pinch. Now, what should we do? The government needs to intervene We cannot stay aloof and say
the government should negotiate.
We have to go. Thank you very much, Your Guest, Honorable Mike Sebalu, Uganda representative of the East African Legislative Assembly, Mr. Nicolas Opiyo, legal consultant at AKIJUL, and Mr. Vincent Mayanja, Deputy Secretary General. Thank you for tuning in. I've been your host, Edmond. The Spectrum will be back on Monday. For the weekend, have a very blessed weekend. Maybe just before we go, Honorable Mike Sebalu, in Nigeria, once Gaddafi said that they should split, the north and the south should be split. Right now, northern Muslims are killing worshippers in churches. Should that country be split? Half-half.
Well, that I don't.
You don't want
I don't want to speculate over that. I think they can
in half a minute
go and integrate their country.
The momentum of what happened in Southern Sudan, where the country was split into two,
is spreading to West Africa.
Religious and tribal issues might actually catch up in Nigeria. The idea is now becoming more feasible and more practical.
We have to go.
Conflicts that we are now seeing.
Thank you for tuning in. Have a very, very prosperous weekend.
Free internet access for everyone. Join the revolution.